Good afternoon. My name is Sata Tutunjian and I'll be moderating the site session today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this joint seminar that is organized by the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture and the Food and Agriculture Organization and the United States Agency for International Development. We are gathered here to discuss how we can empower decision makers in the MENA region to manage and respond to drought by putting the ongoing data revolution to good use. Drought might not be taking headline news similar to other extreme weather events these days, but that does not diminish the role and the damage that drought creates. Drought brings misery to many, many people around the world. Drought adversely affects food production, water supplies, hitting hardest the rural communities that rely on them for income and survival. This past year alone, if we look at it, parts in Ethiopia, both harvests failed, leaving 1/10 of the whole population of Ethiopia in need of food aid. The Tar district of Pakistan, drought reduced water supplies, leading to increased deaths, especially among children from waterborne diseases. And in Cuba, the drought that is the worst in over a century affected more than 1 million people. If we look at our region here, the Middle East, North Africa, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, more people die or are displaced by drought than any other natural disaster. An exceptional drought is currently taking place in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, forcing the government last month to mobilize more than 417 million euros to supply drinking water to remote villages, protect animals and plant resources. And the Agricultural Insurance Organization, MAMDA, also had to mobilize around 116 million euros to reimburse affected farmers. So drought is expensive to governments and to farmers. We know that droughts are part of the natural cycle, and we know that many of the events I just mentioned are linked to El Niño. But we have seen a worrying increase in the frequency, in the intensity, and in the duration of droughts during the past decades. And this trend is expected to increase. I have with me today 3 leading experts who are avidly working on establishing a structure to ensure that governments and decision makers in the MENA region have accurate and up-to-date data that is harnessed through the innovations in information provision. I would like you to join me in welcoming Dr. John Wilson. He's the Senior Environmental Officer in the Office of Technical Support for the USAID Middle East Bureau. During his career at USAID that started in 1988, John was responsible for providing technical leadership in developing and implementing environmental resource conservation and water policy programs. John? Yes.
Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a distinct pleasure for me to join you here at the Global Forum for Innovations in Agriculture to discuss the urgent need for a regional drought management system for the Middle East and North Africa. Today, I want to describe our plans and seek your feedback on how such a system can be used to address the needs of farmers, the agribusiness who suffer from the impacts of drought. First, let me set the stage for this bold new program. Nowhere is water more important or more scarce than in the Middle East and North Africa, which has less than 1% of the world's freshwater resources. The region is defined largely by drylands and drought and suffers from increasing water scarcity, a growing gap between supply and demand, and deteriorating water quality. Particularly worrisome is the growing decline of water available for agriculture, a decline that is further exacerbated by the impacts of global climate change. there is rare convergence in the data from the global climate change models that indicates that the region will suffer from increasing drought, from increasing temperatures, decreasing rainfall, and furthermore, we expect the frequency and intensity of droughts to increase. Drought is a worldwide threat to food and water security in the Middle East and North Africa region. Even as I speak, and as Seta just reminded us, there are occurring serious droughts in Morocco and the region. These current droughts emphasize the gaps and limitations in the current drought management responses in the region and emphasize the urgent need for the governments and the people in the region to develop a new approach to dealing with drought. In response, the U.S. Agency for International Development is supporting the development of a regional drought management system for the Middle East and North Africa. This project will combine the expertise of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, the University of Nebraska's National Drought Mitigation Center, the Dougherty Water for Food Institute, and other regional and international partners. The goal of the project is to deliver new insights, management plans, and drought resilience strategies at national and local levels that will reduce the impacts of drought on the food supply and on the quality and safety of water for vulnerable populations. This project will focus on addressing the urgent need for an integrated drought management system that will enable us to have better understanding of drought conditions and those expected under future climates, and how we can mitigate the effects of these drought events. It will serve the region through three related activities. First, the project will help develop regional and national drought monitoring and early warning systems and the information systems needed to disseminate these warnings to local populations. Second, it will undertake assessments of the impacts and vulnerabilities of countries to drought. And third, it's going to support the development of drought mitigation plans for mitigating the effects of the droughts. The system will monitor drought conditions, assist with drought monitoring and planning and coordination, and provide those officials responsible for drought relief with the information that they need to make decisions. Also, and very important to us, we intend to undergo a number of stakeholder engagement exercises to ensure that this system meets your needs. This approach is based upon the successful programs of the National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska. These programs and approaches have been highly effective in the United States and in countries such as Spain, Australia, and the Czech Republic. While the approach we're proposing here is common to all, each country has its own specific needs and capabilities, and the program will be designed to reflect this, being designed with extensive input from stakeholders. This is the main work of the drought effort that we're undertaking, to work with each country to design a system that meets your particular needs. And it is very important that this project build on the past and ongoing efforts of other organizations such as FAO, who have been developing a regional drought collaborative platform, to address water consumption, water productivity, and drought management. And I'm sure my colleague Pasquale Statuto will talk more about that later. The outcome will be a unique capability to address droughts in this region, one that builds on collaborative science and society-based solutions to solving these problems. In closing, many countries in this region face serious water and food security challenges. Responding to these challenges will require new approaches that emphasize integrated drought management, water conservation, efficient use of water, and development of alternative sources of water. Regional cooperation will remain vitally important, and the U.S. Agency for International Development looks forward to working with our partners to address a regional drought management, to build a regional drought management system for the Middle East and North Africa, one that has a new emphasis on risk management through development and implementation of preparedness and mitigation measures. The challenges are great, but the cost of inaction is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Pasquale Steduto, the FAO Deputy Regional Representative for the Near East and North Africa region, and the specialist on agricultural system response to water scarcity, with particular focus on water productivity, crop-water relationships, and on sustainable agricultural water management.
Thank you very much, Seth. Thank you all the audience coming here this afternoon. As you have already heard from John Wilson, USAID, the context in which we are working is the one of the Near East and North Africa, Middle East and North Africa, where is the region with the scarce water resources in the world. And the drivers are many. You have a physical limitations, low rainfall, but you have also an increasing demand from the population growth, from the development, from the expansion of agriculture. So all these drivers then generate already a sort of escalation of water scarcity, insufficient water availability to produce food. On top of this, as you already heard, there is this problem of climate change. Climate change, which is not only what we expect to receive in the next 40 to 50 years or in 100 years from now, is where all the models, global circulation models, are really showing, and there is a convergence. There are studies showing us 12 of these climate circulation models are converging toward the similar results. In brief, the areas that are already dry will become drier, and the regions of the world which are already wet will become wetter. So this region is expecting to have higher temperature, less rainfall, higher evaporative demand, like has been already said. But climate change, as I said, is not only what we expected at some years and some time horizon from now. It's already today through the implication of its extreme events, one of them being drought. The number of droughts, the recurrent droughts, the intensification, duration, magnitude are amplifying. So it's not anymore the case to consider drought as a one-time event which would justify the, let's say, risk, not the risk, but the crisis approach, which means, okay, it happened, we try to rehabilitate what the impact is there. We use some also, insurance approach, and we try to recover from that. The frequency is too high. It's part of the infrastructure, it's part of the ecosystem. So we have to be prepared in order to minimize the impact of drought. That's imply this shift that has been mentioned. We move from crisis management to risk analysis. And it was about in 2012 when FAO, going through its reform, established a new strategic framework in response to a higher effectiveness to the demand of the country. One way to go was to focus in each region on some specific issues. One of them was water scarcity for this region. And of course, within the water scarcity, there is the problem of drought. At that point, we then realized that there are a convergence of programs from USAID, from ICBA in the region, from us. There are several national, regional, and international institutions that are converging versus this management of the drought. And that's why we got together to establish one unified program for the whole region, utilizing possibly the most advanced space technology to get from satellites, from all the network of climate informations, what are the indexes that would indicate when and warn when the drought is coming. So the forecastability of the drought, the fact that then we needed to analyze, given the specificity of the different countries, what is their vulnerability, what is the impact that that drought would have in the specific case. And from there, tailor a specific response to drought, preparedness plan. And it's here why we are together, and like has been said, the Drought Mitigation Center in Nebraska has been among the pioneering shifting from crisis management to risk management approach for drought. And the complexity that is there, of course, requires not only the partnership among the international institution, but among the country. This is a regional dimension that we are talking about. The drought have a specific local impact, but the way to elaborate the unfolding of the drought has to be done at the regional level so that we join forces, and from there we can be more effective in responding. We needed to minimize the damage, and unfortunately the drought is, like you have heard also from Seta in the introduction, has a big impact in terms of economy, lives, and also food security. So we are here today to discuss a little bit more how we are going about it, and we would like also to hear from you some particular question about drought management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pasquale. And now please join me in welcoming our third panelist, Dr. Rachel McDonald. She leads the Climate Change Modeling and Adaptation section at ICBA. She is passionate about climate change and linking science to policy, especially for the development of climate change adaptation strategies to address future insecurities in water and food.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. Pasquale, John, and Seta have explained to you why we need drought monitoring in this region. We know that it's impacting farmers right now in Morocco and Tunisia, but we need to think about how can we actually help them. So what we've been looking at in this project is how can we harness the data revolution. We hear all about big data, we see those wonderful NASA satellite images, but we have to take that great body of data and unlock the potential of it to be able to show where that drought is happening, what's the intensity of that drought, because we know that farmers need to make decisions based on what's going to happen today and in the next 3 months. We know that national policy makers, international aid agencies need to know what's the severity of the drought, how long has that drought been taking place. So one of the challenges for us working in the MENA region, it's already dry. Well, there isn't an awful lot of water here. So if we're going to be developing some sort of drought monitoring, we've got to begin to think about how we classify a drought and what type of information it is. Now, any farmers here, they'll be able to begin to tell you what a drought looks like on their farm. You haven't had much rainfall, you can see the soil moisture is getting much drier, and you'll be able to see a response in your crops. Your crops are beginning to go a little bit yellow, they're not quite coming through. Now that's fine as a farmer, but if you're doing this at a national level and a regional level, we've got to be able to find data sets that begin to show about those lack of rainfall and the soil moisture. So this is where we are working very closely with Nebraska, which is the best drought center in the world. Through funding from FAO, but particularly USAID, we're able to bring that expertise to the region. So what are we doing? Well, first of all, we are trying to put together the data sets that will allow us to define a drought. Now, defining a drought in Morocco is different to defining a drought here in the UAE, and that's different to defining it in Jordan. So we're working with the partners in the countries to what does a drought look like in your country? And then we've got to find the data that we're going to combine to develop drought maps. It has to be reliable, it has to be accurate, it has to be here next year. So we've been looking at the many different data sources of what we can use to bring together to develop this regional drought management system. And we're looking at satellite images, but a lot of what we have to develop data on, for example, what's the soil moisture, what's the evapotranspiration, those are things we have to generate on a daily basis using models, because we don't measure them, we cannot measure those things. So what we've been doing at ICBA, we've been working very closely with NASA over the last 5 years under funding from USAID, and we now have a series of water and crop models that are designed to work for this region. The type of modeling that you get out of America and Europe doesn't reflect our hydrological systems here. They don't have good irrigation. There's in many parts, particularly the UAE, nothing grows unless you have irrigation here. So we have to make sure those models are representing that. So we're combining those data, and we're already beginning to generate new maps highlighting where the drought is. Those maps are showing right at the moment in December, particularly January, the most severely affected areas are Morocco. And we can begin to see the extent where in Morocco are we doing this. So this is the general developments as we're going forward. But generating data, we can go onto the web and there's data all over the place. What we need to do is we need to ensure these technical innovations, these data innovations, are embedded within national and farmer decision-making systems. So an important part of the work that we're doing at the moment is talking to people like you and saying, how can we ensure that we can support Morocco, Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon, UAE, develop their own drought monitoring management systems, because it's at this national level that decisions are made, and it's at this national level that support is given. For example, at the moment in Morocco, we can see where the drought is happening, but with all these maps, we need to have some sort of trigger mechanism for those mitigation and planning systems to be put into place. So what we're doing is we're having cross-party stakeholder engagements in the many countries. And what we know is that drought affects not just the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Water, but the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance, because we might need more food being imported, we might need more infrastructure being developed. So it's very much cross-party negotiations linking through to these technical innovations. And what we're wanting to instigate is not only innovations in data, but innovations in policy responses. How can we stimulate financial tools, for example, insurance policies, to help mitigate these risks? So that it's very much an ongoing process triggered by data innovation, but looking at how we want to ensure within 5 years that the farmers and the water supply managers in our region do not have to deal with the consequence as severely as they're dealing with in Morocco today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. So now we have heard from our panelists. They've identified why we need drought management. And Rachel has explained how we can harness available data that's available there to generate new, localized and more targeted data that is of use to the decision makers and to farmers in particular regions. So instead of the normal panel, which you would ask questions to our panelists, we brainstormed this morning and we decided that we would like to hear from you. We would like to pose as a panel, they would like to pose a few questions for you. And then if you can give us your perspective, introducing yourself and the agency that you represent, whether you present more the government's perspective, the farmer's perspective, or the private sector's perspective. And based on those comments, we will then hear from our panelists some of the feedback that they can give you. So I'll pose the 4 questions that the panelists would like to pose to you as the audience. And we have the mic here around. So if you would like to contribute, please raise your hand and you'll be supplied with a mic. So the first question to the audience is, what do you think is needed for an effective drought management system? We're looking at establishing the system over the next 3 years. So what would be what you as users would need from such a system? What is the role of the government in managing and mitigating risks associated with drought from your perspective? And what is the role of the farmers in preparing for drought? And then From your knowledge in this region, especially that in particular, we're looking at a drought management system for the Middle East and North Africa region. What are the challenges and issues with the current drought management in this region? Thank you. So please, who would like to start? Who's the brave first person that would like to make the first contribution? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ahmed Ibrahim Imam from Desert Research Center in Egypt. Firstly, I am greatly appreciate your effort, and I'm sure you do a very excellent work in order to face this problem globally. As I worked in the desert since 20 years ago in Egypt, the problem that I come in direct contact with is this effort, unfortunately, don't reach to these stakeholders. I mean, when you talk with the Bedouin in the desert, a great strategy or a very good strategy already implemented in the meeting like this, in workshops. But when you deal with the stakeholder or the beneficiary, which is the Bedouin that live in the desert, I think this effort don't reach as we wish to these stakeholders. Also, from my direct contact with the Bedouin, it's very important to simplify the concepts. I mean, when a certain expert, he is a very good expert, but when he deal with the Bedouin, he should simplify the concept. For example, don't go to the farmers with food. It's not logical. It is. I'm not joking. It is a very important point. Also, we should mention and concentrate on increase the awareness of the Bedouin, increase the awareness of the desert dwellers, because if you convince one Bedouin with your concept, be sure he will distribute all these ideas to the Bedouin. But I mean, if I deal with the Bedouin, as I come from, for example, in Egypt, they deal with us as a foreigner, not as an Egyptian. The desert dweller deal with us as a foreigner. I hope you can understand what I want to say, and I hope a very good result in this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure, yes, please.
Hello, I'm Sarah Saad from Sudan. I'm soil scientist working in the National Center for Research. My interest is climate change and soil productivity in Sudan. And we had the same problem from the drought problem in Sudan. We have so many drought many years ago. My reply to the first question from the panel, what can we suggest to the panel about our data development in controlling drought? I suggest water management, because we use a huge amount of water in irrigation. I think in Sudan and Egypt, nearly the same thing. They don't control the water they use in agriculture. Secondly, I think all funds should concentrate not only on data collection and mapping and modeling and so on and so on. So we know the problem. We should concentrate and develop new technologies to adopt new drought-tolerant crops. All researchers everywhere should concentrate on dealing drought-tolerant crops, because drought is naturally will happen. So we really need to reserve food for the population of the population. Secondly, about the transfer of knowledge, I add my voice to Dr. Ahmed from Egypt, that knowledge transfer is important, and awareness not only among farmers and decision makers and fundraising agencies, but even for educational system should be implemented, that there are environmental problems that will happen for the new generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm sure our panelists, yes, please.
Thank you, Setter. I thank you so the panelists for this very important topic. Well, I just want to introduce myself, Aziz Belkassi. I'm the ICARDA Regional Coordinator in the Arabian Peninsula. But my intervention not linked to ICARDA, more to the MENA region. I'm from my country, Tunisia. As I heard much that in Morocco and in Tunisia, strategies are already established, let's say. And I really fully from Sudan that no matter to develop these maps and these technologies to show that climate change are existing, now they are confirmed. We have to focus on management, how to manage drought. I suggest and I believe that from the region, which is the oldest in the world, there are many techniques and technologies developed and some local knowledge and know-how developed in Maghreb area, in water harvesting, in Yemen, in other many countries. We have to see back to this, to innovate these techniques and to prove them and to adapt them. I think most of us were well adapted to drought before. Yes, now the frequency is different, but there are some technologies that should be readapted and reused to cope with drought. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have room for one or two more inputs.
I'm a farmer. No, I'm not I want to say something about the role of the farmers in a way. Because at the end of the day, well, I'm working for FAO and the regional office in Cairo. We suffer the most are always the farmers. And with the time, I think we have been increasing the vulnerability of farmers also to drought, reducing the variability of their genetic material that we're using. We practically don't grow anymore in very marginal areas land races, which is a mixture of genotypes, which is give variability but stability in time in terms of production. And we start working more and more on variety. And varieties because the seed sector is the one that is leading, one of the leading sector in the world together with the let's say, the chemistry, fertilizer, pesticide, etc. So this we have to take it in consideration because the farmers, especially marginal areas, have been becoming slaves of the system. So we have to give them back what it was belong the farmers. So this, I think, together with your program of monitoring, classification of drought, etc., this is very important. And as Pasquale said, minimize the damage today is extremely important. We're already talking about damage. And those poor farmers in marginal areas have to leave, and they are disappearing because it's not sustainable anymore living in certain conditions. Research people has been moving more and more to marginal areas, growing crops, stable crops like wheat with 350, 400 millimeters down to 250, 200, 180, moving to steppes area in this part of the world. And that's, with the time, has been a killing. And I think we have to go back and give this variability back to the farmer because it belongs to them. So I stop. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would turn it to our panelists to reflect on what they heard from you.
Okay, I can start.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, it's working. Okay. I think these are extremely important comments that have been done, and I'm happy to hear that because we have been discussing, you know, these three components of drought management: the monitoring and early warning, the specificity of impact, vulnerability assessment on local area, specific area, agroecological zone, national level, subnational level, and then the preparedness plan, the response. So I fully appreciate what the Research Center mentioned about the outreach. Is one of the reasons why this partnership is there, because we as FAO are trying to take care exactly of the third component, essentially working together with the national institution how to approach the local community. And we are adopting, I think you are aware that there are some projects done together with the FAO local office and through the European Commission also and the Desert Center. And we know the issue of the Bedouin, when you approach them and so on, to let's say, reach the trust, to gain the trust of the people. And once they gain that, like you said, then they are the one even driving more. We are fully aware of that, and that's what we wanted to do together with the local institution. There is no question about that. So this awareness building, this approach accounting for the local culture, the local community is fundamental. Then it's very relevant also what the lady from Sudan said. In the response plan, the water management remains an important dimension. Alfredo, in a sense, have touched the issue of the drought-tolerant crops. We would say, let's watch out, okay, closely. I don't want to say no, but the drought tolerance crop, again, which crops are bred for drought tolerance, genetically improved, local variety, or the usual staple variety? And in fact, one of the roles of ICBA is also to look for varieties that are adapted to marginal lands even. So we are paying very much attention to the issue of the local variety because increase the resilience, having the diversification, having as much as possible tolerance, and possibly have a program of improvement of the variety, but of the local one, of the one that have been maybe neglected in the big program of research for genetic improvement. And the lady also mentioned awareness building. So you can see that this dimension of the local community is relevant in order to outreach as much as possible how to prepare in order to respond to the possible drought. And the same, as I had mentioned from Icarda, beyond the maps, how to manage drought locally. And this is exactly, as I had, this partnership, which is not limited to only to what you see here, but include all the important stakeholders in the country and at sub-regional level and local level. This is, we know very well, but we wanted to put the, let's say, not the reset, but we want to bring the most update of everything, from the monitoring and warning, the specificity of the local condition, the way to respond properly. Adapting, and analyzing the vulnerability and the situation case by case. That's why it's important to have, let's say, partnerships, very relevant, complete enough, comprehensive enough, in order to be able to respond in this complex manner. Is the complexity, why we are still looking at the data monitoring and reporting, because several indexes that have been developed over time. It is true, you go on the web, you find several of these indexes, but they carry over the uncertainty introduced by the climate change itself. The drought, in the way it was, let's say, characterized before, was relying also on variability of the past. You know, the probability analysis were too much rely on the past. But we know that that variability and variance is affected by the disruption and the diversion introduced by the climate change, which is something that is happening in the future. So a sort of composite type of indexes are needed to identify more probably the type of drought that is eventually unfolding. The intensity, when is happening, when is the time we can consider, because this is the problem also drought. It incrementally increase, and you need to understand it will continue to increase, so how much that will impact on my crops, on my local community, and therefore to respond to it. So this is a complex matter. It requires a good analysis and a good socioeconomics, you know, local understanding how to respond. So we are on the same page with that, and this is exactly the framework that has guided us in making the partnership, in trying to develop the program, and so on. So the last point, Alfredo, you're perfectly right. This local variety represents a wealth because it improves the resilience of the system where we are working. Diversity is one way to respond to the drought. And this, unfortunately, was a little bit, against what, you know, the conventional thinking. We say we improve the productivity of the crops, select the best one, and we forget about the drought. Now is the climate change, the drought is coming back. We wanted to reintroduce resilience in the crop. We had those crops, were the local variety. So we needed to defend, let's say, or conserve what has a value also at the local level. So these are all part anyway of the picture. Crops, management, local culture, and so on. Thank you very much.
Just to re-emphasize, into any sort of drought planning, you have farm preparedness, and then you have national policy preparedness. And I think those ideas that you've been giving about, for example, governments giving concessionary loans for water infrastructure or maybe storage of forage to help farmers get through those difficult periods is part of it all. Helping the farmer prepare, whether it's crops, whether it's small infrastructure, or just facilitating the financing of those developments are as important as national safety net handout type of responses.
Just a quick comment. I want to thank everybody for that input. It reflects our thinking. It's nice to have our approach being affirmed. One of the great challenges for us, though, will be reaching out and getting that stakeholder involvement, and we intend to begin that process actually next week in Tunisia and Morocco. But we look forward to continuing to work on this, and hopefully you can join with us in a partnership in that effort. Thank you.
I also want to thank the panelists for their input. I want to thank you for your input. I also want to mention that both ICBA and FAO, we have booths here. So if you want to know more about our programs and the projects that we're doing, please feel welcome to drop by. Especially you mentioned about drought-tolerant crop varieties. ICBA is extensively working on that. We have a gene bank even here in the UAE with salt-tolerant and drought-tolerant varieties. Tomorrow we have a session on quinoa, which is a crop that both us and FAO feel strongly holds a promise for future crop, food security. So you're all invited to attend. It's during the morning around 10:30. Thank you.